Thanks, Mark. Always a pleasure to be here. And it's wonderful to connect with all of you through this wonderful medium. Before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that the land upon which I live belonged to, among other tribes, the Potawatomi people. And I lift that up for a couple of reasons. One, because today we're going to be exploring the ways in which we are positioned within systems and structures that are oppressive, that have dispossessed native peoples of their lands in this country and really consigned them to the margins of poverty and disenfranchisement. And secondly, Rabbi Miriam Klatz, my friend and teacher, in her introductory essay this week, really encouraged us to grow an awareness of the history of the lands upon which we live as a first step toward recognizing the ways in which ultimately, for those of us who have the privilege of owning land, right, we are benefiting from the suffering of others, and allowing that realization to really soften the heart and help us grow into compassion and develop the motivation to become good allies to those in our society who have become marginalized through white supremacy and the ways in which it lives in our systems and structures. And we're going to be exploring a little bit today the ways in which entitlement, a sense of entitlement to privilege, grows in our hearts and minds through inattention or unawareness. And Adi, if I can please ask you to share the screen and also drop the link for today's text sheet in the chat, that would be so helpful. So first, back to Rabbi Miriam Klatz, who teaches this week that we are asked to let go of attachment for a time during the Shemitah year to our roles or identities in these systems, and to bring our awareness to all that arises in the process of release that is Shemitah. The instruction is clear: release your hold on the land and on other creatures, including human beings. Let the land rest. Let others be free of their debts to you. Stop. Let it go. In other words, release your hold on the systemic structures that govern your sense of entitlement to ownership, acquisition, and privileges afforded to you by your station within the system. Where you do not hold privileges of ownership, wealth, or status within that system, you are equally called to release your attachments to the socio-political definitions that inform your sense of self. Remember, and this is key to doing this work in a spiritual context, my friends, remember, you are free. Right? We are inherently free, no matter the color of our skin, no matter our degree of entitlement or lack thereof. Right? You may be shaped by those systems, but your soul is neither created by nor identified ultimately within these humanly created structures. In the Shemitah mode of seeing and so relinquishing, we are all more free, and the sacredness of all life is more fully revealed. I want to read that sentence one more time. In the Shemitah mode of seeing and so relinquishing, we are all more free, and the sacredness of all life is more fully revealed. So I taught before that our sense of entitlement, our sense of ownership over the natural world, and other peoples who may have a different kind of relationship with the natural world than that we've inherited from our Western tradition. That is born in the shadows, in the dark corners of unawareness, of mindlessness, of inattention. Because when we're really paying attention to the natural world, to other species, right, to our place on this earth, it's hard to not notice that everything is coursing with holiness, that everything is ensouled, that everything is alive, that everything is a manifestation of the great ocean and oneness of being that flows through us and all of reality. And looking in that way helps us to soften our sense of entitlement and ownership, and instead to come into a greater quality of intimacy with the natural world, with one another. And so I want to actually turn now to Genesis chapter 2. And Adi, if you could scroll down, we need to see all of the highlighted text on one page. That's really helpful. Okay, I highlighted verses 7 and 19 here in such a way as to lift up the literary parallels that are here in the text. We may or may not know that actually biblical text was written according to the literary conventions of ancient Israel. And if we know how to lift up and identify those conventions, right, we can actually glean a deeper quality of meaning from the text. What we have here are two verses, one describing the formation or creation of Adam, right? And there's a resonance between the word Adam and Adama, right? Adam, or earthling literally, and Adama, the earth. Right? And the creation of all of the animals and all of the birds in verse 19. So we're going to take a look at these. If you want, you can follow along in the Hebrew. See if you can catch parallel phrases and ideas, right? So Yud He Vav He Elohim formed the earthling from dust of the earth. And notice in verse 19, the parallel. Out of the earth, Yod He Vav He Elohim formed all the animals of the field and all the birds of the sky. So first of all, we're all made of the same stuff, right? We're all made of earth stuff. And as we know, right, we and all creatures on this planet arise out of the earth and return to the earth, right? And become recycled, right? And give life to other, or give rise to other life forms. Onward in verse 7, Yod He Vav He Elohim blew an ensouling breath, an ishmat chaim, and of life, right, into the earthling's nose, an ensouling breath of life into the earthling's nose. And then notice the parallel here in verse 19 when it comes to the animals, right? Then God brought them to the earthling to see what the earthling would call them. Right? And of course, when we name something, when we call it by name, right, we are expressing breath. We are expressing breath, right? And so here too, there's a sense that Adam plays the role of the divine in relationship to the animals, right, in expressing breath, right, in the act of naming. And we'll see what the result of that is, right? When God expresses breath in verse 7, the earthling became a living spirit. In other words, not contrary to being a dead hunk of matter, just a lump of earth, right? Through the reception of soul or consciousness, the earthling becomes a living spirit, a nefesh chaya. And likewise, turn now to verse 19, whatever the earthling named, living spirit was its name. Through the act of naming, right, which is an act of turning toward and looking deeply and trying to discern what's unique and special about this particular being, right? There was a recognition that the animals were not dead hunks of matter, right, to be used as Adam wished for his own pleasure or to grow his wealth or what have you, but they were living spirits, right, with whom he was in an intimate relationship, just as God entered into an intimate relationship with us by breathing life into us. So you can see here that actually the text is trying to draw a parallelism here, or a parallel between the creation of the human being, the earthling, and the creation of the other earth beings, and the ways in which the earthling came into right relationship with the other beings through the act of naming, right? Into intimate relationship through the act of naming. Adi, if I could ask you to scroll down here. And I want to lift up the voice today of a Potawatomi teacher. Some of you may have read her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmerer. This is from a piece called Returning the Gift, who says that every one of us is endowed with the singular gift of paying attention, that remarkable focused convergence of our senses, our intellect, and our feeling. It's so appropriate that we call it paying attention, for it is perhaps a near universal form of currency, It is exchangeable, it is valuable, and it incurs an expense on the part of the payer. For attention, we all know too well, is a limited resource, right? And we live in a society right now, my friends, that is actually encouraging us, right? We're embedded within systems and structures right now that encourage inattention, right? Or unhealthy uses of attention. Some might even say pathological uses of attention, right? Whether it's through our devices, right, or the media, or the news, or fake news, or whatever, social media bubble we happen to be in, right? There's a way in which our attention is short, and as a result, we're unable to pay attention to the planet in a deep way, right, and to the other beings and other earthlings, right, on this planet who actually lived here before us and continue to live here now and have the wisdom that we all need to heal our relationship with the earth. So says Robin, what should be our response to the generosity of the more than human world? In a world that gives us maple syrup, spotted salamanders, and sandhill cranes, shouldn't we at least pay attention? Paying attention is an ongoing act of reciprocity, the gift that keeps on giving, in which attention generates wonder, which generates more attention and more joy. Paying attention to the more than human world doesn't lead only to amazement. It leads also to acknowledgement of pain. Open and attentive, we see and feel equally the beauty and the wounds, the old growth and the clear cut, the mountain and the mine. Paying attention to suffering sharpens our ability to respond, to be responsible. And Adi, if I can ask you to scroll down a little bit, deep attention calls us inevitably, just a little bit up. Yeah, deep attention calls us inevitably into deep relationship as information and energy are exchanged between the observer and the observed, and neither partner in the exchange can be anonymous, right? Just as when Adam named the animals, they were no longer anonymous its, right? They became real, living, ensouled beings. They are known, they have names. There was a time not so long ago when to be human meant knowing the names of the beings with whom we cohabit the world. Knowing a name is the way we humans build relationship. It is a sign of respect to call a being by its name and a sign of disrespect to ignore it. And this paragraph really spoke to me and broke my heart. Ethnobiologists tell us that our great-grandparents spoke fluent natural history. They knew the names and personalities of dozens of birds and hundreds of plants. Today, the average American school child can recognize more than 100 corporate logos. They can give a name to about 10 plants, and these include such categories as Christmas tree and grass. We have lost an entire vocabulary of speech, of experience, and of relationship. Our fundamental currency of relationship, our highly evolved capacity for paying attention to those species who sustain us, has been subverted in a kind of intellectual hijacking. How can we care for them, monitor their well-being, and fight for their existence if we don't even know their names? So Adi, you can stop that now. And we're going to turn now to our meditation. And we're going to use a noting practice where we name our moment-to-moment experience as a way of becoming intimate with it, as a way of recognizing that it's not something we own or control, right? But part of the beautiful dance of the divine oneness of being, the energy current moving through the ocean of being, moving through us, right? And in like fashion, this might then inspire us to name the people, the animals, the ecosystems that make our lives possible here and now, right? So that we can actually come into intimate relationship and stop relating to the natural world as an object to be manipulated, controlled, and despoiled for our own comfort and convenience. I invite us to just settle into our seat. The way the noting practice works is very simple. We keep whatever our present moment experience is in the foreground of our attention moment by moment, but in the background, we lend a soft mental note, right? We name what is transpiring here and now. So for example, as you're breathing in, you might note softly in the background, in breath. And as you breathe out, you might note out breath. And if the breath is not a home base for you that feels comfortable and sustaining and calming, you can always bring your attention to sounds You might even catch some of those beings, those friends, those living, ensouled beings, the birds, the cicadas. We just lend a name as a way to come close and become intimate and know deeply that all of this is part of the current of life, for a time moving through us, ultimately to be returned to the earth. And even here and now, we can observe how all of it is impermanent, moving, changing, not the kind of thing we can go to the store and buy or commodify or manipulate or take away from somebody else. Of course, mind states might carry our attention away. You can just note thinking, or remembering, or planning, or fixating, or worry, anxiety, love, joy, fear. In this way, we begin to become intimate with the animals of our own heart and mind. Even those beasts that feel scary, that threaten to overwhelm us. And we watch how it all changes. How there's absolutely nothing here to objectify. In the human economy, there's stuff out there, people out there that we can objectify, commodify, manipulate, oppress, and abuse. In the divine economy, we are all earth stuff, impregnated with, infused with spirit. And as we turn our attention toward that reality to align our vision with the divine vision, we can then grow in awareness, attention, intimacy, appreciation, and ultimately learn how to live in harmony.
Thank you so much, Sam. Beautiful, beautiful teaching and practice. As we have been throughout the month of Elul, we punctuate the practice by attuning ourselves to the sound of the shofar, bringing all that we have engaged in this practice in this time into the practice of paying attention, directing our attention to that sound. John Silver, who will introduce it.
Thank you. For those of you who've heard my shofar during this week or during this month,
Be a little louder, John. Sorry.
On the meaning of each sound, where the tekiah is emet, shvarim shua could be. Can you hear me now? Better? Is that better? Okay. Shvarim shua, the moaning, if only. And the most complicated one is tekiah gedolah. It's a combination of so many different emotions and teachings. It can be hope and strength, but it's also, in a sense, the sound of trying to hold on, to grasp as long as possible, but also while you're releasing. So it's kind of two views of Shemitah. You're both grasping at the same time as you're releasing. And it's a sound of impermanence because it doesn't last. So I know when I sound this, my intention is it'll last forever with all my strength and all my breath. I want it to last, but I know it's going to end, and as with everything in life, not necessarily when or how I want it to. It could be strong, it could be wavering, it could be long, it could be short. As with life, it is what it is. And I'm going to invite you to direct your awareness to the moment by moment struggle that I have. My struggle to keep it longer, to not stop, to delay the inevitable. And you'll hear the struggle if you pay attention moment to moment. And it'll end and hopefully be followed by a new breath.
Thank you so much, John. And friends, we end, as we always do, by offering an opportunity for those in mourning or observing a yard site to recite Mourner's Kaddish. If you'd like to add the name or names of loved ones you're remembering or honoring today in the chat box, you're welcome to do so now or at the end of the Kaddish. And I invite you to join me in body or in spirit, and in rising in body or in spirit for Kaddish.
Yitkadal,
Gadal
Yitkadash,
Yikadash
Yitkadash,
Merabah
Merabah,
Bialma
Yama,
Bibra Hiruche Bialich Malchute Bechayot Yumechon Bichaye Dechol Beit Yisrael Ha'agalat B'Zman Karib Mimru Amen. Yehesh Me Rabba Meralach Le'olam Lame Amayah Yitbarach Yistabach Yitzhar Yitmam Yitnaseh Yitadar Yitalel Yitalel Shmei B'Kudusha V'Yichu Ha'elam Yikol Birchata V'Shurata Tishbechata V'Nechemata Amiram Ba'ama Yimru Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Yin Shemaya Chaim Elko Yisrael Yimru Amen. Oseh Shalom Yimamah Uya Shalom Aleinu V'Elko Yisrael V'Elko Yoshei Teva Yimru Amen. Friends, thanks for joining us today. Thank you so much to Rabbi Sam Feinsmith for leading us so beautifully today. And you're all invited to stay on for some conversation with Sam about the teaching and the practice of Shemitah as taught today through the lens of these texts and this practice of naming. And thanks to John Silver, as always, for the Tekiah Gedolah today. And I should mention as well that John is blowing shofar, the mindfulness service at B'nai Jeshurun that I mentioned earlier, as part of the team that will be leading that service with Rabbi Shuli Pastow and Cantor David Mintz. Looking forward to joining you for that, John. Thanks to Adi Stein, as always, for holding our space, tech space with skill and grace. And we hope you will all join us tomorrow as we conclude the Shofar project for 5781 and bring out, at least for now, bring out the month of Elul. And Sabrina Sojourner will be leading us as we sit into Shabbat and sit into the new year tomorrow. For those who are leaving, I want to wish you an early Shabbat Shalom. And of course, a Shana Tova Umtuka, a good and sweet year of Shemitah, of release. And hope to see you, if not tomorrow, then next week. We'll be back live next week after Rosh Hashanah during the Days of Tshuva on Thursday and Friday. So for those who have questions for Rabbi Sam Feinsmith, please put them in the chat box and preface them with question if you have a question. Otherwise, of course, we welcome reflections or thoughts as they come up for you. Sam, it was really powerful. And both of those readings are really mind-blowing. I wanted to ask you, I loved the connection of that noting practice with the naming practice as described in Genesis. And I was thinking about animalizing the thoughts and feelings that arose. And I was thinking especially about the challenging ones, parents always get these questions like, why did God invent mosquitoes? And if you live in a city, God forbid, cockroaches and critters and rats and and we have those things in our lives too, right? We have challenging experiences that are scary and unpleasant and sad. The description in Miriam's piece about acknowledging, and recognizing and seeing clearly our part in the systems that have been built on the pain and suffering of others and maintain pain and suffering, which we don't really want to look at. It's not pleasant. So I wanted to just invite you to share a little bit more about that, about how the naming and recognizing and bringing attention to the unpleasant, the scary, the sad, devastating, just that passage about how we've lost the vocabulary and we don't know the names of any, these species. It's just so overwhelmingly sad. Maybe, I don't know if you speak a little personally about how you cope with that kind of, challenge.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Look, we're currently all involved in this process of teshuvah, you know, and we have to understand a little bit about what teshuvah is, right? Within the neo-Hasidic orientation from which IJS is operating. So the way that the psychology of Hasidic practice and theology works, or the way it understands what's happening when we do tshuva, or why there's a need for teshuva in the first place, right, is that essentially there are parts of us that become severed from their divine source, right? Which is an ocean of pure consciousness, being, and love that pervades all of reality, right? But because we're not paying attention carefully, you know, sometimes parts of that ocean, like a wave from that ocean or a drop from that ocean, can become severed from the ocean, as it were, right? And when that happens, we also lose a sense of intimacy with the sanctity of life, right? The sanctity of our own lives, the sanctity of all of life, right? Of the whole universe, and whatever may lie beyond. So, you know, when those painful parts of us show up, right, in conscious awareness, they're essentially trying to be reunited with their source, right? So that that energy and that aliveness and hidden divinity that's within can be restored back to the ocean of divinity from which it came. Okay. You don't have to believe any of this stuff. I'm just trying to explain it. This has been true in my experience, which is to say that when I feel something like greed, right, or entitlement, or hatred, right, or judgment about a group of people, that somehow my group of people is better, right, or more enlightened or wiser, right, or really gets it, you know. What I notice is that the great flow of energy and aliveness that's moving and coursing through me becomes arrested, right? And that creates tension in the body, a kind of armor around the heart, right? And a kind of distorting of the mind's natural clarity and openness. Okay. Which inhibits our capacity to feel really fully connected to the great ocean of being of which we're a part, right? And the remedy is to bring all of that into conscious awareness. Because according to the Hasidic tradition, and this is my experience as well in practice, right? It's our consciousness that is the conduit or the channel, right, through which we reestablish the connection with the great flow of being that's moving through us and through all of reality. And naming, right, is one way to bring consciousness or attention, right, to something that we've relegated to the margins of our consciousness. So our natural tendency, certainly my natural tendency before I started practicing, and still sometimes, you know, when one of those difficult emotions, you know, we might even call them animal-like in their ferocity, right? And in their impulsivity, right? And in the drive to just kind of, really take control and prey on our unconsciousness, right? In some ways. When that happens, right? There's a tendency to want to not look, right? To actually feign mindlessness, right? And we do that in all kinds of ways. One way is by, reaching for email or the smartphone or TV or a drink or food. Another way is to just repress it, right? And engage in a kind of willful ignorance or forgetfulness, right? And another way is that we project it out onto other people or groups of people, right? And that, by the way, is happening to us right now as a people, right? In the sense that, for example, folks who are getting behind white supremacist ideologies, rhetoric, and activity, right? That's more, violent these days. They're feeling these emotions, these difficult emotions, fear, anger, hatred, right? And because they're not able to hold them in mindful awareness, they're projecting them outward, right? Through the distortions that come with that hatred and that anger. And they're scapegoating us, right? As Jews and Black people and Native American people, right? And brown folks and so on and so forth. So when we see this happening in our own being, we can cultivate some compassion for all people who are actually falling prey to this very natural human tendency, right? But the moment we turn toward a name and we say, this is anger, right? This is jealousy. This is greed, right? The animal, as it were, becomes more tame, right? It starts to calm down, because what those emotions need, as I said before, is attention, loving attention. That's what they've always needed. That's what they've always wanted. And because we haven't gotten that either in childhood, or as adults, those animals act out and try to wrest control so that they can get what they need, right? Except that through delusion, right, they don't fully understand, because they're operating on a more visceral level. They don't fully understand what it is that they truly need until we give it to them. But consciousness knows, right? Our awareness, our mindfulness knows what they need. And the moment we can turn toward them and name them, they begin to feel soothed, right? And eventually they start to become more fluid. And they, as it were, soften back into the ocean of being from which they arose and out of which they became kind of severed, right? And detached. And actually, what we know now is that according to the scientific research on the neurobiology of what happens when we name difficult emotions, the actual act of naming on the level of our actual synapses, right? It causes the frontal lobe to become more active, right? The parts of the brain up here, right, that actually help to calm and organize the other kind of older, more reactive parts of the brain become more active when we do that, and allow the other regions of the brain, especially the amygdala, right, which is responsible for destructive emotions when there's a sense of danger, right? And the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory, right? I remember something that happened in the past. I feel a strong emotion, and there's an impulse to flee, right, or freeze, right, or fight, right? So when I actually name what's happening, the science shows that these parts of the brain become more active, right? And they soothe those other parts of the brain that are more reactive. So this operates not only on a spiritual level, but on an actual cellular level, right, within the human brain, which is to say consciousness can reshape the mind, right? And actually, as we reshape the mind, we also reshape the brain. Okay. And the same is true at the societal level, which is to say, whatever we ignore, whatever we relegate to unconsciousness, right, will eventually become more reactive. So if we ignore the systemic racism, right, that exists in our culture, and the ways in which Black and brown people have been marginalized and decentered, right, and oppressed, or the same, for Native Americans, what will come out of that eventually is an uprising, right?
Yeah.
As we saw, and as we're seeing, right? Because the parts of our society that we've relegated to the margins need to be seen. That's what they need. They need to be seen. They need to be held. They need to be acknowledged. They need to be lovingly witnessed. Right. And out of that, the teshuvah that I'm describing can happen, right? Which is we can be restored to a kind of divine harmony. But without that happening, all we're going to see is ongoing reactivity.
Yeah. All right, Sam, we're at time. That was just beautiful. And just to put a point on it, and to go back to the Genesis verses that you brought for us to, what I'm taking away is that this process of naming, the sacred process of naming, noting, in all the ways that you just described so beautifully, can help transform everything into a nefesh chaya, into to elicit the sacred dimension of life, which is the goal, after all, of our practice, to elevate awareness of the sacred dimension of life, particularly in this Shemitah year. Just a reminder as we end, that the IJS faculty is committed to, with Chazon, the Jewish Environmental Organization, to something called the Brit Chazon, a covenant for this year, which is, I put in the chat box, invite you, if you haven't already, to go there to investigate that and hopefully join us in committing to a year of transforming and applying our practice, and applying it in practical ways through commitments to the earth and to each other and to the peoples of this earth, so that our practice yields fruit in terms of transformation in this world. And also, a number of people I see are asking, and I'm not sure what the problem was with the chat today, but the service that I'm co-leading with Cantor Dave Mintz and Rabbi Shuli Passo at B'nai Jeshurun is open to all. I think you do need to register if you want to join live. I believe it probably will also be streamed on the BJ YouTube channel, and the recording will be there. It's going to be next losing track, Wednesday, second day of Rosh Hashanah, the 8th, at 9 a.m. Eastern time. And so the link is there, with John Silver participating as well as the Baal Tekiah with the shofar. That's it for today. Sam, thank you so much once again for leading us so beautifully, and looking forward to being with you all tomorrow to sit into Shabbat and to close out our shofar project in Elul with the wonderful Sabrina Sojourner. So we hope to see you tomorrow at the same time. Many blessings to you all. Hope to see you soon. Shabbat Shalom to those